Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Nel Schaaf, and I'm your host for today. The webinar is going to be talking a lot about the dementia-inclusive approaches and the new standard that has been published at the beginning of this year, actually. So we're very proud to introduce that document to you today. At BSI, we really see this as a key step towards generating some positive change in the communities and generating the much needed awareness around dementia, because there's still so much social stigma surrounded with living with dementia, and we are trying to break through that by providing the needed education and information in communities, and we hope that this standard will be the first step towards that. So today we have a lot of exciting speakers lined up for you today. So we'll be talking about the major demographical shift that's happening right now. So across the world, we're seeing many societies having more aging population, and in turn that leads to challenges in terms of supporting individuals living with dementia, because we'll see more people living with dementia as time goes on. So first we'll hear about that global challenge. Then we'll be moving on to talk about the importance of the consumer perspective and how we've influenced the standards with representatives for that. Then we'll be talking about the dementia-inclusive communities and what that could look like, and how the standard can provide support in generating such an environment. And I'll be wrapping up the speeches with a talk about how to protect our own brain health, because I think we're all quite interested in that point. And then to close off, we'll have about 10 minutes for a Q&A session. But before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping. So if we can go to that slide, please. Thank you. So as you can see, the event today is being recorded, and you will have access to that recording afterwards. So no problem if you have to leave a little bit earlier. You'll also all have been muted aside from the speakers to avoid any interruptions. And if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function. That is both for technical questions, but also for questions for our panel. So we really try to encourage people to post your questions in there, because we'll have that 10 minutes for your questions. So please feel free to put in anything you can think of for our speakers there. After the event, you will receive a feedback survey. So we ask you to fill that out to let us know what you thought of the event and maybe what you'd be interested in hearing about next. Also, a quick note is that the slides will also be available. There'll be some links at the back of the slide deck to the landing page for the Aging Society's documents, and also for the dementia-inclusive document. And there will also be a discount code until the end of May. So if you're interested in purchasing the document, it'll give you a little bit of a help there. And I believe someone has just posted that in the chat for you as well. So final note before we get started is that this is a CPD recognized webinar. So if you're interested in receiving your certificate, please mark that also in the feedback survey. So without further ado, we'll get started today with our very first speaker, which is Sube Banjari. So he's joining us from the Plymouth University, where he is the professor of dementia, where his research focuses on the quality of life and quality of care for people living with dementia, and also the evaluation of new treatments and services. So over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you also for inviting me here. So yes, absolutely. So what I'm going to be doing is
Seem to have a little bit of a connectivity issue with yourself, Sube. So maybe let's first move to Anne and see if it improves in 10 minutes time, if that's okay. So Anne is going to be talking to us about the consumer perspective on things. So she is helping BSI actually influence standards to take into account the vulnerable consumers, and she brings with her 30 years of experience in doing so, and has also been involved in the development of this standard as a UK expert. So off to you first, Anne.
Thank you very much. Next slide, please. As you can see, I'm a consumer and public interest representative with BSI, and we look at different aspects of products and services and ensure that the consumer voice, people who use these services, are actually involved in it. Next slide, please. So in relation to dementia-inclusive communities, why is a consumer perspective and why is this development key? Well, the guiding principles in the new standard say that to achieve real and sustainable change within communities, a change in societal culture about dementia is needed. The principles address the lack of awareness and understanding of dementia that result in stigmatisation and barriers to diagnosis and care, with this stigma informing stereotypes that are generally inaccurate, as they focus on the symptoms of dementia rather than recognising the abilities and skills of the person with dementia. Next slide, please. So why is the consumer voice important? Well, the stigmas and barriers can lead to mistreatment, to exploitation or abuse, to isolation and poor mental health for persons with dementia. So it's essential that the consumer voice is heard, particularly on behalf of those who may have no voice. Thank you. Next slide. That's gone back the way. Next one. Thank you. We've got gremlins in our slides today. So who is the consumer voice? Well, persons who are living with dementia and their care group givers are the main voices that need to be heard to ensure that they can benefit from encouragement and meaningful participation, being engaged and involved in social, physical and cognitive activity in both their personal and their family lives, in their community, and especially in respect of their health care. Next slide, please. So how do we make sure, particularly in relation to standards, that the consumer voice is given importance? And how did BSI identify that the consumer voice was important in the development of this new standard? Well, BSI had developed a PASS, which stands for a publicly available specification, with Alzheimer's UK. And this was the starting point for the consumer and public interest network involvement. And my background is in advice and representation, both for and with vulnerable consumers. So I was selected to work on this new standard. My first priority was to listen to the voices of persons living with dementia and their caregivers, and also consult with those organisations who provide services and education and training to persons with dementia and their caregivers. Age Scotland had just set up a new dementia project, which included a forum for a wide range of individuals and groups, which included established dementia-friendly communities. And that enabled me to hear both what worked, but more importantly, what didn't work or could be improved. And this enabled me to better contribute that consumer voice. I also had excellent support and input from the Dementia Services Development Centre at Stirling University, with their senior lecturer in dementia contributing to the development of the standard through the UK committee. Next slide, please. When you're not in control, you can't change them as you will. So these are the 6 consumer principles, but how can we apply them to this standard? how can we apply them to persons with dementia, caregivers? Because these are all sort of vague terms, they cover a multitude. So if we could move on to the next slide. Oh. Thank you. So access is about providing equal access to opportunities and resources for persons living with dementia, including but not limited to a focus on stigma reduction, definitely including accessibility and personalised care and participation. Choice, it's really important to ensure that care is culturally appropriate and consideration given to a cultural background, personal experiences and norms in the context of formal or informal services to an older person living with dementia. It's really, really important that they have that choice. Safety, the right to safety, including privacy and security. And this is particularly in relation to assistive technology and products and devices for persons living with dementia. We were very fortunate to see what artificial intelligence products were available to help people, but also seeing them actually in situ and getting the feedback from persons with dementia as to how they benefited them and improved their lives. Safety, including privacy and security, this right, particularly in relation, as I said, to assistive technology and products and devices for persons living with dementia. Everyone is worried about scams and people getting into your computer. It's all the more important that persons with dementia are safe. Information must be clear, accurate, relevant and timely. And to have that, it's essential to enable persons living with dementia and their caregivers to give them the opportunity to make informed decisions. It shouldn't be about somebody else's decision, it should be their decision. Redress, persons living with dementia should have the right to be actively involved in decision-making processes about policies and programmes, and including those directly concerning them. And they should be provided with independent advice and advocacy to support them, to enable them to have their voice heard. In relation to sustainability, we felt that the provision of a variety of options in an integrated manner would facilitate a strengthening of independent living and family caregiving, which would improve and increase the quality of life and well-being for the persons with dementia and the caregivers, and also mitigate rising healthcare costs, particularly for the public purse. And representation, the final one on this slide, the inclusion of the voice of the person living with dementia and their caregivers must be included in developing products, services and standards to be truly a proper, as I would call it, standard. Next slide, please. So when and where was this consumer voice applied? Well, I took all the insight I gained to the International Working Group at its first meeting, which was held in London way back in 2018, where I met standards makers from across the world. There were further meetings held in Shanxi in China in November 2018, Berlin, Germany, the hottest time in Europe, in June 2019, and Sydney, Australia in November 2019. As one of two native English speakers in the International Working Group, I was responsible for proofreading together with the delegate from Canada. And the proofreading was not an easy or a simple task. But the virtual meetings proved to be very useful, and this was before they became the new normal. Next slide, please. British Standards Institution Consumer and Public Interest Network, or CPIN for short, recently celebrated its 70th anniversary of involving consumers in the development of British standards. And should stress that all CPIN reps are volunteers. When I attended the first international meeting, I got the feeling that volunteers were slightly looked down on by only one standard maker, but however, we soon became best buddies. More recently, ISO, recognising the importance of consumer engagement, published practical guidance for standards development bodies titled Involving Consumers, Why and Hows. And this guidance was aimed at national standards bodies, member bodies of the ISO, national committees of the International Electrotechnical Commission, I can see why they call it IEC, and as well as other standards development organisations, giving them practical guidance on achieving consumer participation and standardisation. It covers when and how to involve consumers, highlights the value that consumers bring to standards development, how to organise effective consumer participation, and defining who is a consumer representative. So it says it provides guidance on how to involve consumers at every stage of standards development work. Notes the degree of consumer participation should reflect the relative importance to consumer interests of a particular standards project, and incites the need to engage consumers in the planning of standards work programmes, both national and international, and in policy matters relevant to the consumer. It states that consumers should participate in identifying priority areas of work where consumer participation is deemed essential. So going on to my final thoughts. Next slide, please. I'll leave you with some final thoughts that everyone who contributed to the standard hopes it will achieve. Meaningful participation and involvement. Caregivers provided with support. Everyone being made aware of the legal aspects and the rights to services. Above all, human rights, respect and dignity, and recognition of cultures embedded. And research and innovation having safety and privacy, living with dementia as a priority. And awareness and training for all providers of products and services, including, and probably in my mind, especially health and social care providers. I get worried when it's very top down and when people are spoken down to, and being a wee Scottish woman, I speak out. So be afraid, be very afraid. I noticed that I heard last week that the Financial Conduct Authority is about to launch a new consumer duty on all regulated firms. I feel that would be very, very welcome as well. So if you would like to be involved in standards making and being a consumer representative, I'm sure Nell will pass on your name to the CPIN, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Anne. I love that phrase, be very afraid, because Anne is going to be supporting consumer perspectives. Love it. So we're going to be moving on to Ian because we haven't gotten Subi back, unfortunately. So Ian Sheriff is joining us to talk about what dementia-inclusive communities could look like, and he's also joining us from the Plymouth University, where he is a lecturer and researcher. And on top of his day job, he's also been a UK expert helping us with the development of the standard. So he's in a perfect place to help us know what it's in there. Thank you, Ian.
Thanks ever so much for the introduction. And I'm in the part of Plymouth that seems to still have IT connection. So I'm really lovely to be here today. I want to start off with a statement. And this statement drove me way back in 2008 when I was talking about dementia then. And it said, we can't change your dementia, but we can change the communities that you live in. And taking that statement, I was doing some research at the time, 2010, looking at timely diagnosis for people living with dementia. And what they were telling us on top of that, that they felt isolated, they felt ignored, not valued, and embarrassed due to social stigma of dementia, felt unable to access services and organisations for social support. And also there were significant rates of depression, both with the family carer, but also the individual. So armed with those facts, I was at that time asked by the Prime Minister of the day, David Cameron, to start with Angela Rippon and a couple of others, a dementia challenge group. And I took on the sort of the weight, I suppose, of dementia-inclusive communities. I started in Plymouth, and over the a year or two, we managed to get 120 companies on board. Each one of those companies has to provide an action plan every year of what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. And key into that is that if their staff members are carers of somebody living with dementia, then we actually structure support, but also say, well, okay, so you've got to do this to the person you're caring with. Maybe you come in later in the day. So it also influences HR policies. It just can't be a set of words that people talk about. It's got to be tied up with actions. And on those companies that are on that, I got the BBC straight away. I think the BBC has been the voice of dementia friendly communities for me, and we made our local radio station dementia friendly. How do you do that? Well, I sat down with all the interviewers, the staff, etc., and we went through a series of things that they could do, but also would they run programs about dementia on a regular basis, and they're doing that. But the heart of any PDA dementia friendly community, I use the words of Tom Kitwood. And Tom says, where there is special knowledge, empathy, and bring those two together, miracles can occur. And I've seen that in dementia-friendly communities, not only here in the United Kingdom, but I work in Japan, China, Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda. And we're all moving towards the same goal. It's in being inclusive. It's about listening to people with dementia and their carers, and then designing your services around that. I also lead on the rural dementia in this country for the Prime Minister's group. And if you don't, you can understand, I'm sure all of you listening, that sometimes living in rural communities, you're even more isolated than you would be living in an urban setting. So on that group, I got people like the Royal Agricultural Benevolent Institute, Rural Community Farming Network, rural GPs, the community bus services, the WI. The WI are massive here in England. They have, I think it's about 260 members, 1,000 members, and they actually, their quest was to become dementia friendly, but also support people living with dementia in rural communities. But the biggest piece of glue in our rural communities is our town and parish councils. There are 10,000 town and parish councils in England. So what we did, we carried out a quick survey to see what they were doing as far as dementia goes. And they, one voice were requesting, can we have a guide of what we can do and support our communities? So we've written that guide. It went out with the blessing of the Prime Minister. And the sort of things we were asking, I'm just going to give you a sort of a flavour. So at every council meeting, they formally adopt a proposal to plan to work towards becoming a dementia-friendly council. Work towards. It isn't about saying we've made it. You're always working to achieve. Have a councillor responsible to promote dementia-friendly. Ensure that your policies of your council actually are dementia-friendly and inclusive. And it goes on. So that has gone out to 10,000 town and parish councils. And to do that, we actually got 5 parish councils to work together. When they first started, they weren't very happy about it. But down the line, those parish councils, this is the lowest form of local government, have a dementia support worker. They've got 2 support workers supporting that person. They are supporting 60 families in those communities, in those rural communities, and they're running groups, inclusive groups, be it from walking, singing, poetry, fitness, local history. You just think about that in a rural community. That makes you feel part of something, part of a movement. And they're not just for people living with dementia and their families, they are inclusive. So moving on, one of the things we highlighted, were told by people living with dementia, was going to the dentist can be a nightmare. And so armed with those facts, myself and the lead for the dental school here in Plymouth have written a dementia dental friendly guide for every NHS dentist in the country. We got it out on the sort of in the surgeries just under a year ago. It is illustrated by Tony Husband, who is a national recognized cartoonist, illustrator, which draws you in to read it. So I didn't want people just to think, oh yeah, I've seen one of those before. In it, we offer a list that you can actually get your surgery to become dementia friendly, getting there anyhow. So we talk about the people. So understand your patient. Make sure that you can have pre-visits so you can see what is going on in the dentist. Sometimes you may have to book 2 sessions because it takes longer to work with an individual with dementia. We talked about the processes, and we also talked about the place. And we managed to get some of our 3rd year dental students to actually redesign what they think would be the perfect dental surgery. That was so successful that Henry Shrine, the people who design dentists, dental equipment, dental surgeries, took it on board and took it away. So I'm really proud of that. And that is out on the, as I say, out there in the world at this moment, and happy to share any of this with you. The next thing that I was asked to do was see if we could do something about air travel for people living with dementia. Once again, I got a group of enthusiastic aviation experts, the CAA, Civilian Aviation Authority, airlines, people living with dementia, people with other hidden disabilities. All of this is driven by what the person says they need or what they require. Did it work? Yes, because within 18 months, I managed to have debates in the House of Commons, House of Lords. We had the Secretary of State for Transport get behind it. The CAA did. Now, every airport in the United Kingdom, and I'll say that again, every airport in the United Kingdom has to meet certain standards as far as welcoming people who have hidden disabilities, the process when you go through the airport, and through security, etc., etc. So we should be very proud as a nation that we've done that. That is so hot that I'm now being asked to, if that can actually be flooded out around the globe. So I know I've only got 10 minutes, but I think the other thing I want to mention, and you'll know this, all of you on the line, throughout COVID, we had to rely on information technology, AI, etc. And I think technology today allows us to connect anytime, anywhere, to any place in the world. This has and will do dramatically change the way people can be supported. I'm not saying it's the panacea. I'm certainly not saying that, but it's a tool that we need in our armor, in our bag of tools as we go forward. These are some of the comments from people living with dementia and their families during COVID. Because of video links, Zoom links, I can see my family more often. I join in more activities because they're online. There is remote diagnosing going on. I'm not saying that's wonderful, but we had to do it. There was shopping online. And I think, in fact, I know dementia-friendly communities came into their own during COVID. I was chairing the Plymouth Dementia Alliance with over 120 organisations on it. And it was wonderful at our strategic meeting once a month to actually start sharing of information. Where would we best put our resources, etc. And that also happened with our rural communities. So what did we know about 2021-22? Research indicates where local councils, rural and urban communities proactively engage in providing support to loneliness, isolation, and stigma experienced by people living with dementia, it tends to impact positively on their health and well-being. I think that's quite a challenge that all of us need to take on board. And finally, this was said by a said person, Alex Fox, who said, we have, all of us here today on this call, more creativity than we know. People and organizations are finding millions of ways to offer their help, knowledge and skills to other people in their communities. My last slide, I'll go back to, just remember, we can't change your dementia, but we together, collectively, can change the communities you live in. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Ian. I found that very inspiring that we can all play our part in that. Thank you so much. We'll go to Michelle Reshef now. She's going to talk about protecting our brain health, and she has a background in social work, specializing in working with people living with dementia. And she's actually studied the cognitive, behavioral, and social implications of dementia, and by doing so, developed an approach to battle dementia. So over to you, Michelle.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been really interesting to learn about Ian's and Anne's work. I am, overwhelmed. So I assume that some of you would like to know a little bit what we can do in order to prevent dementia. So this is something that can be done, and I'm going to use my few minutes to share with you a little bit of information. Before we start, a little bit of who I am. So I'm the founder of Dementia Prevention UK, which is a registered charity. We're providing education to the public on dementia risk factors and practical tools to prevent or delay dementia through lifestyle modifications. We have three aims. The first is obvious. We want to make sure that people will know that dementia is preventable. We want to make sure that people will know that dementia is not necessarily part of aging, and I keep on giving our queen as an example. And the third thing is that it's really important to go to your GP and discuss any cognitive decline worries that you have, because the early diagnosis can definitely change the trajectory of the disease. So just keep these things in mind. A little bit of facts. So research suggests that 40% of dementia cases could have been prevented, and 40%, as you can imagine, is a very large number. So if we are now more than 100 people in the room together, 40 of the people in the room could have had beautiful, amazing lives if they would have try to modify their lifestyle and make sure that they lower risk factors. The next thing is that dementia affects the brain 20 to 30 years before a person actually shows symptoms. So if you are in your 30s or in your 40s, this is a great time to look at different risk factors for dementia and to see what are the things that you can do in order to modify your lifestyle and try to delay or prevent dementia. And the third thing is that 2/3 of people living with dementia are actually women, and there are specific reasons for that. And I invite you to explore more and understand more how dementia affects women. So what I decided to share with you today is not the risk factors, but what are the things that we can actually do in order to try and prevent or delay dementia. So the very first thing that I suggest that you will do is know your numbers. And what do I mean by that? I mean by that no one really can take responsibility over your life, and you are the best doctor that you can provide for yourself. And that is why it's really, really important for you to look at some numbers. So what are the numbers that I suggest you look at? The first one is blood pressure. So you'll see me in a few minutes, but I'm 47, and every few months, myself and my husband, we have a routine where we take our blood pressure. The machine itself doesn't cost a lot. You can buy it over Amazon, and it is a little clue to let you know that maybe something is not really working well for you. So blood pressure is something that is really important for you to measure every 3 or 6 months, and see that your blood pressure is actually a normal blood pressure. Then we have our waistline, and I'm not talking about your weight, I'm talking about your waistline, because we know that we might have some inflammation and infections in our gut area, and it's really, really important to make sure that we know what the waistline looks like, and if God forbid we have some inflammation, we can take care of it. Then we have our sugar level. So again, this is a very simple blood test that you can ask your GP to have once a year or once every 6 months. And again, this is a small clue to let you know that something is out of balance. And if something is out of balance in your body, definitely it has an impact on your brain. And it's really, really important to know if your sugar levels are too high or too low. Then we have cholesterol. So we do have quite a lot of information about cardiovascular diseases. I'm not going to expand on that, but definitely cholesterol level is something that you also need to check. Another number that is important for you to know is vitamin D and vitamin B12. We know that these two vitamins are really important for your cognition, for your brain. And if you don't have sufficient amount of vitamin D or vitamin B12, your cognitive ability might decline. And again, that might be a reason that you don't perform as well as you used to. I would suggest for you to go and check your vitamin D and B12. Again, simple blood test. Then we have something new, which is the eye retinal picture, which if you have glasses like me, then this is a picture that you can have each time that you go and check your prescription. And that gives you, again, a clue of what's going on with the vessels in your eyes, and definitely it might give you a clue of what's going on with the rest of the brain. So these are the numbers that I would suggest for you to look at and to know. The next thing that is important is to develop a sleep routine. And I can't stress enough how sleep is the foundation of everything that is healthy. Good mental health and good physical health, they all start with a good sleep routine. So a good sleep routine means that you have enough quality and enough quantity of sleep. So how much is good sleep? Between 6 and 8 hours. If you need to cut on things, sleep is not something that you should cut on. Then we have eat food that loves you. And I really like this sentence, and I didn't invent it, but it means that you need to eat food that gives you something back. So I like pizza and chocolate and ice cream, but all that food doesn't really love me back. But if I eat avocado and nuts and salmon, that type of food loves me back. So make sure that when you're looking at your plate, then some of the things on the plate, at least half of your plate, is food that actually loves you back, and you can benefit from it. Take care of your mental health. We know that people that suffer from long periods of bad mental health, unfortunately, also later on in life experience a cognitive decline. Then we have, I would suggest to manage your work-life balance, make sure that you have enough work, but also enough social life. And know your body clock, know when you're alert and you can do more of hard work or more a work that needs concentration and maybe in different hours to do different type of work. Make sure that you maintain your social interactions, add physical exercise, which is extremely important. And the last one is stimulate your brain. And people don't really understand what do I mean by stimulate your brain, or what do everyone means by stimulating the brain. So as you could see, we have kind of a health triangle here, and we're going to focus for the next few seconds on your cognition. And why is it important to make sure that you have enough connections in the brain? Why is it so important to stimulate your brain? When dementia unfortunately comes our way, what happens is that we're losing connections. But if, for example, like here in this slide, you have more than one route for certain type of information, then you won't feel the symptoms of the disease that harshly like a person that didn't develop enough connections in the brain. So it is really, really important to keep on working and developing new connections and to stimulate your brain. A brain that is stimulated can concentrate on one thing, learning one thing at a time. So if you're cooking dinner and texting your friends and listening to music and checking your child's homework, that is busy brain. But a stimulated brain is a brain, for example, that is reading an article and asking questions about that article. So how to translate that into your day-to-day life? You can see this song here. I see trees of green, red roses too. Most of us, I assume, know this song by heart. But how can I listen to this song but also stimulate my brain? So I would ask those questions: what, so what, and now what? So I can ask the question, what is this song is about? How does that song relate to me? What are the things that maybe are interesting in that song? Or what are the things that I can imagine around that song? And now what am I going to do with that information? Maybe I can share my experience in listening to that song with a friend. Or maybe I can add that song to my list because it is so uplifting. It's really, really important that you make sure that at least 1 hour of your day you're doing stimulating work, something that really makes the brain happy and excited about living, which is in return protects your brain. So I think that I'm done. And so thank you so much for listening. And yeah, I'm staying around to listen to others as well.
Thank you very much, Michelle. That's, again, very inspiring. We're learning a lot today. I wanted to ask the speakers to join me for the Q&A because unfortunately we didn't get Subi back. So it's going to be a little bit shorter than we had planned, but that leaves us many opportunities for the questions at least. So thank you for joining me in that. So thank you for those who provided some questions in advance or in the chat. You can still ask these questions as we go along. I think the first question I'll ask is for Anne, actually. So do you have any advice? Because someone's saying, okay, someone with dementia could still be in the workplace. How could we create more awareness about this in the workplace?
Well, I think that throughout our work on the standard, that was something that we definitely thought a lot about, because the framework for dementia-inclusive communities actually includes workplaces, includes businesses, includes financial, it includes everybody, services, shops, whoever. So workplaces of all kinds are part of the community, and at the end of the standard itself there's an annex, and it gives various action areas that are for information that, you know, make people think how they could do things. And one of the action areas particularly mentions the support of employers and employees who are persons with dementia or carers, and recommends adapting the work environment to support the independent working of the person with dementia or the caregiver. And I have two little stories, if I may. One of the first people that I met in the dementia forum when I was doing the research had actually been a secondary school deputy head teacher who had to give up her career, her life, to care for her mother. And her mother had actually died 2 years previously, but she was still so engaged and saw this new forum as somewhere that she could have her voice heard to help other people in the future. And also from personal experience, I had a friend she was a chartered accountant and she was working in a solicitor's office locally. And the solicitor came to me, I'd sort of given her a reference for the job, and the solicitor came to me and she said, there's something wrong, and she kept saying there's something wrong. But she didn't know exactly what it was, but she knew that she wasn't performing as she did before. And eventually, a long time later, she was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. She wasn't even 50, and it was just absolutely tragic. And the employer tried to keep her on, but obviously because it was legal and, you know, it was really, really difficult to do. And eventually her husband, who was the bursar of an independent school, he had to give up his job as well. So people have to give up their lives. So the longer people can be looked after in the community and help the community, it helps everybody. So thanks.
Absolutely. It's quite shocking, isn't it? I was wondering, maybe this is a question leading on to Michelle. If you're at the early stages of dementia, you've just been diagnosed, is there something we can do to slow? Anything else that you've not mentioned, maybe something specific for someone who already has dementia?
So yes, definitely, it's a great question. I call it, yeah, crutch time. This is when you should not give up on anything. Usually when people receive a diagnosis, they decide to not share that information with family and friends or their place of work. They decide to, well, you know what, if I got dementia, then I'm going to eat what I want. I'm going to be you know, sit on the sofa and do nothing, where actually there's so much that can be done, and more activities to stimulate the brain and engage in group activities and engage in physical activities. Don't give up on reading books. Don't give up on reading newspapers. Don't give up on meeting people. Anything that you've done before, do even more now, because you must protect the connections in the brain. So definitely there's a lot that can be done.
Thank you for that. It's a bit of a hope that we can share with people.
I can also share with you another interesting information, that we know that when people engage in activities that delay the disease, that they can actually delay the severe symptoms by 5 to 10 years, which is a lot of time. And when you share that type of information with people, say, oh, you know what? It's worth it. I'll give it a go.
It's
so give it a go.
Worth it. Thank you so much. Let me see. This one is maybe for Ian. In terms of the standard, is there anything that we can say to organizations to recommend them to start implementing the dementia-inclusive standard? And are people even aware of the benefits of doing so?
The answer is yes. And where do you turn your eyes to? Well, there is enough written, I think, both in this country and the United Kingdom, about what we would suggest are the key components of a dementia-inclusive community. But I think it's not rocket science. You know, you can't make a rocket science out of this. This is just about communities doing what communities do best, and that is coming together and helping each other. And I saw this emphasized throughout the COVID lockdown. Communities came up with all imaginable things to actually support people who are vulnerable in their communities. But if somebody wanted to build a dementia-friendly community or start that process, there's the Alzheimer's Society nationally in this country. There is the original BSI document written way back in 2012 or 13, something like that, that gives you the key components. But my sort of raison d'etre is, I go back to that. We can't change you, but we can change communities. And that is, you know, the power of community is massive. I remember George Diarchi and also another professor who worked in Glasgow. They both worked in academia, but they reckon you can change the world better when you live in a community. I tried it. I did it as a social worker. I went and worked and lived on the community that I was working in. It took a lot out of me. I can tell you, I had hair before I did that job. But it's a marvelous feeling, because I tell you what I did. I slept on the streets of a community for a week, but I had a big Bunsen burner, you know, 45-gallon drum, put holes in it, put coal in it, and put some bones and soup on it, and kept that going. Now, the first day, everybody walked past and thought I was totally bonkers. The second day, I put some chairs out and people sat around the fire. On the third day, that grew bigger and bigger. And on the fifth day, people told me, who are you? This is our fire, get out. And they were solving their own problems. They really were. You know, there was older people talking to younger people talking to disabled, etc. It all happened around this fire, and it was going on 12, 14 hours a day. So my analogy of that is, and I wrote a paper for Social Work Today, You don't need social workers, just put fires on street corners. It's a bit like putting a heater outside at night, and everything congregates towards it. But it was a marvelous experience, and it taught me an awful lot about people. People are basically, and this is my naivety, are and they're kind, they want to help. There's nothing better feeling when you've helped somebody. So if people listening today can do anything, which is what we want you to do, we don't want you to just listen to us. We want you to go away and do something. Go back to your communities and change them. Do it in whatever way you can, and make the world a better place, not only for people living with dementia, because if we get it right for them, you get it right for everybody. Sorry to go on that one.
No, that's perfectly fine, perfectly fine. I have here, it's quite a lengthy question, so I'm gonna try and just condense it down. I think maybe, Anne, this is maybe right up your alley, because I know that you also provide some input in the regulatory side in terms of the voice of the consumer. So someone is saying here, this is wider than just a community experience. It is actually about the Equality Act. Is there anything else that we can do to make it come across that these are like legal rights that people need to be supported? Is there anything that you can think of that we can do to enhance that? Oh, I think you're on mute, Anne.
So I was so good about keeping quiet for a change. One of the things that, well, when I first started with CPIN, people will know from my accent, I'm not English, and everything they talked about was all English law, and Scotland has a different judicial system, legal system. So I was always on their backs and, complaining about it, asking them to do something. But when you're doing an international standard, you have to be very cognizant of the fact that everybody's got a different legal system. So I suppose I was sort of one step ahead of others. And we had to be very careful when we were using the standard that we were talking about human rights, but we weren't talking about specific acts, because every country had different acts. So we were very careful not to talk about legal things, but to say that you need, and my bag is independent advice, you need that independent voice of information, advice and advocacy, someone to speak up for you, no matter where you come from. So that would then get the legal aspects across, so irrespective of what country you're in. And the one thing I would like to say, I love the emblem that, particularly in, I don't know whether it's UK-wide Ian, or just in Scotland, but the forget-me-not as a symbol. I think it's just such a lovely symbol, and they're all in flower just now because I've got loads of weeds in my garden. And I think it's something that happens a lot, is that the person is forgotten. So I think forget-me-not is a lovely symbol.
Indeed it is.
I hope that.
Can I add to that? Can I add to that?
Of course.
Being a fellow Scot, and it doesn't sound like it, but I come from the island of Barra in the Outer Hebrides. My mother did, and my grandmother. But in the island of Barra, if I go home, I can be walking down the road at 10 o'clock in the morning, and an elderly lady will come up like this, wringing her hands and saying, "Oh, Ian, I see you had eggs for breakfast." Now, that is not inclusive, that's intrusive. But so it is about getting the measure right between what is inclusive and what is intrusive. And I think that challenges sometimes communities, and also people who are receivers of that support. It's got to be measured, and it's got to be, as I say, not intrusive, but inclusive. And it's a marvelous feeling when you're actually part of that process. And I do, yeah. And the forget-me-not symbol is a very powerful emblem.
Indeed.
I don't think we Scots can claim that.
Let's share it.
Okay.
So this is a slightly different question, but it's more related to workplaces. So they're asking, is there something we can actually implement into the workplace? So I do know we have the Aging Society has created a standard on the age-inclusive workplace. So we do have that international standard. I don't know if maybe Anne or Ian has any information on the content of that document that could help people on the line today.
I think certainly all employers in the UK are bound by the Employment Acts and employment legislation, and obviously there is now no retirement age in the UK when you're talking about aging societies, but also there's a duty on all employers to be inclusive, not to discriminate, you know, either for age or for anything else. I do recall somebody mentioning to me that you couldn't actually get a blue badge for dementia, which actually kind of, if the person was at an early stage, you know, they didn't qualify for one of the benefits that would give them automatic entitlement to a blue badge. And that was a wee bit worrying, that it was a condition, but it wasn't recognised. It may have changed now. But I think anything that can be done to help people out in the workplace. But as Michelle said earlier, people don't actually want to tell people that they think they've got it. I mean,
yeah.
You know, at my advanced years, I go into a cupboard instead of the fridge and go, oh my goodness, what am I doing? We all do things like that, but particularly when you've worked in a standard for dementia, it gives more worry. So
Definitely. And maybe that leads on to a question for Michelle. Someone's actually asking, do you also present in organizations? Is that something organizations are already doing?
I'm really happy for that question. I'll try to be positive. Some organizations, yes, we do link with their well-being team, and we do provide brain health talks to their employees. Unfortunately, I think just like Anne and Ian said, there is stigma around dementia. And when I come to speak with well-being managers in large organizations, and I say, I'm from Dementia Prevention UK, we don't have dementia. No, it's to do with us. This is the old people that no one sees in the street. And that's part of the problem. And we need to raise awareness. Dementia is everywhere. Everyone has someone that they know that have been affected by dementia. And this is something that we all need to take care of. Exactly. I really like what Ian said. It is a community challenge, and we need to work on it on a community level. Part of our community is definitely the place that we work. I am happy to say that some places do provide care support groups for people that are caring for family members that are living with dementia, but unfortunately there aren't that many of them, and I do suggest for many more to join. At the end of the day, it will just increase the productivity of the person that is caring for a person living with dementia, because they would be able to, you know, share their challenges and difficulties in a safe environment. So yeah.
Thank you for that.
Now, I think the question
go
was,
ahead.
start to implement standards in the workplace. And I think that, and it's echoed from all the speakers today, is that if we get it right for people living with hidden disabilities, we get it right for everybody. So it isn't, you know, we're doing it just for this. It's about the whole community that's working in that environment. And I visited a company the other day where they take into consideration the faith needs of the staff, so that at certain times of the day they have a special room that they could go and pray and other things. And the workforce, the retention of the workforce was over 15 years. So nobody left, you know, if they came in 15 years, and the well-being also, their sick days dropped because they got all this sorted out. So I think, you know, there's no panacea for it for every organization, but I think if you, within your organization, if you start to address it, you'll find your organization will become more effective, more efficient, and more happy, because you're actually working for the benefit of the people working there. Sorry,
That's fine. Thank you for adding. So we have time for one more question. I'm going to add two together to make it easy. So one is a question for Ian in terms of the dentistry document that you've mentioned as to where to find that. And then someone's also asking, is there any document related to how to adjust buildings for older persons, for creating it to make it more dementia inclusive? And where could we find such a document? Or maybe that's already included in the standard, I'm not sure. So maybe Ian, you could answer that one.
Yeah, this is the document that we've written. You can see it's got a cartoon type thing on the front.
Yeah.
This goes all the way through it. So it makes it easy to read, easy to pick up. It's also friendly in its approach. So what I will do is if I send it to you now, and could you make it available to all our participants today? And I could also send the air transport one as well that we've written. Yeah, so that
perfect.
And if anybody wants it, they can have the other one we've written, which is the one for town and parish councils. They're not rocket science, they're just good practice. And it was written with people, all of them were written with people living with dementia, but also practitioners. So it's, yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed doing the dental one, but also getting the drawings because they make you want to read it. So.
It's always nice to have the pictures in there, I keep saying. Thank you so much, Ian. I think that is the last question for today. I do want to mention we had a presentation earlier this morning about age-inclusive workplaces and care-inclusive workplaces that also touches a bit about buildings and design. So if you're interested in that, I would recommend that you look at our website because there is a recording. So that is definitely something I could recommend. So there's nothing left to say for me apart from thank you and giving some guidance as to where to find certain things. So thank you so much to our speakers. Much appreciated to make some time for us. Thank you for people who are listening today. And then here are the links for the different products, and we will email the ones that Ian has mentioned if he can provide the links. So the first one is on aging societies. If we have any new publications, they'll be added there. Then there's a direct link to the dementia framework standard that's available there with the discount code that is available until the end of this month. So I'll wish you a good day for the rest, and thank you so much, and see you at the next one. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.